Hey people, it's Brian Fitzy. If you're watching this video, you're probably watching it for one of a couple reasons. You're either a live looper or interested in getting into live looping, or you've been asking me for the past year for this rig rundown video, so let's jump right into it. This is the new rig. It is based around a pod HD500X from line 6, and it's also based off of an RC300 from Boss. The RC300's been the brain of my setup for a couple years now, and I don't have any plans on jumping ship. As far as other things that you can see right off the bat from the top, I've got this over here. This is a Radial Hotshot ABO balanced line output selector. It's just an XLR router, so whenever I have my loop microphone, normally I'd have two microphones on this stand. My loop microphone, which is going to be this one right now, is plugged into it, and I have the ability to route it two different places. So I've modified this unit. I've swapped out the switch for a 3-pole, and I've also added an LED. When I want to send that microphone into the loop station directly, I stomp it on. It switches over to beatbox, so it's lit up green there. That means this microphone on the stand is routed directly into the loop station. When I want to route it to the pod, I turn this off, and now it's going to the pod. All right, let me show you guys how I have this whole thing set up as far as routing goes. My guitar is plugged in on the pod into the guitar input. Surprise. My electric violin is plugged into the aux input, and I have a microphone line coming out of the ABO hotshot into the pod. The way that I have things routed is A is guitar, B is bass, and C is my violin tones. D is for my vocal routing for this loop mic. So when I have the microphone set to be routed directly into the loop station, going into the microphone pre on the RC300, this is the sound I've got. When I switch it onto the pod, my patch D, and I change my routing on the radial, this is the sound I have on the same microphone. Hey 1, 2, for example with the beatbox. You can immediately hear a tone difference. The reason you can hear a tone difference is because I've EQ'd the mic slightly differently. I've tried to make sure that my live main vocal mic is at the same volume, gain, tone, everything as this one when it's going through the pod. I can change the sound of this microphone signal before it hits the loop station with the presets that I've set on this particular patch. So for example, I have
Megaphone, check it out!
I also have a high frequency boost, like a high mid frequency boost when I want something to cut a little bit more in the mix. Super notched, real tight Q. The other sounds I've got are reverb links. So for example, short reverb, 1, 2, and my long reverb, 1, 2. I'll use those things for different purposes on different songs. For example, I could do and obviously, when I switch it off, I'm losing that little tail of the reverb, so I have to make those decisions. Other sounds that I've got here. I've got my guitar dialed in there. Different sounds, auto wah. I also have a MXR Phase 90 clone. Got my distortion tone. I have a lead booster. I always set my lead booster to the very last patch just so I know where they're at. As you can tell by looking at my rig, it's not labeled, so I've got to always have everything memorized. I try to stick to a script. Saves a lot of time, saves a lot of frustration, and in the moment, you do something impulsively once it becomes second nature, and you don't do the wrong thing in the wrong patch. So, got my clean tone with my boost. I have a little delay tail that I've set up with the expression pedal here so I can dial it all the way off or on. I use the tap tempo to dial that in. There's also a real subtle chorus on there. When I need a distorted lead, just turn them both on. As far as my bass sound goes on this particular patch, it's a really blunt bass. It sounds really nice on hip-hop and R&B stuff. My violin sounds, we'll get to them in a second. I have another bank of patches. I have a JC120 clone here. A little bit of early reflection on the amp. Here's going back to the Fender. Slightly different tone. Same deal as far as my patches go. Instead of an auto wah, I've got an octaver. Just real subtle in there. Another phaser. I have different distortion. Doesn't really hit the front end of a JC120 the same way, and I specifically wanted that kind of tone. Moving on from there, my bass patch on this is using a bass amp model, aside from using octave droppers to get the bass tone as close as I could with an electric guitar. Then it's going through a bass amp, which makes it sound even more convincing in the mix. So I have two different presets on this one as well. So I can change the sound from this clean bass, which has a little bit of more of a bite on it, and I can add a synth. Can also change to a slightly more aggressive kind of Rage Against the Machine. My violin tone is different on this one. I'll show you that in a second. And instead of using a separate preset again for having different vocal tones, I chose instead to go the route of having a very specific sound that I use quite a bit. Which is a big stack of octaves and fifths. It's a fun one for me. I have other patches as well where I'm running both a guitar through a guitar amp and then octave dropper into a bass amp on the same preset. Alright, so as far as the violin sounds are concerned on this rig, I have everything dialed in for my regular, call it my E-Violin signature patch there. This is the tone that I've basically arrived at after lots of different rigs. That's if I'm going to be looping. When I need to take a solo, I have my lead booster, which adds a room reverb as well as a compressor on it. I'm not just using the Pod HD500X as a signal processor, I'm also using it as a mixer. So I have all these different routings set up, and everything comes out on just one output mono, and it goes into the RC300 on one line mono, freeing up other inputs on the unit. Everything is sitting at the volume that it needs to sit at when I'm looping it, so I have to have lead boosters for different things. I don't need to go down and mess with the volume on any of my instruments at any point in the performance. Everything's sitting there where I need it to sit. I used EQ on every single preset, basically like a mixing engineer, exclusively like a mixing engineer, to make sure that everything has its own lane. This makes it sound great on my West tones, which are crucial for me hearing exactly what I want, or through the sound system at any venue, whether it's a festival, a small dive bar club, or a real big place with a killer, incredible, hard to fathom amount PA system. So everything sits in the mix right. I also have on this patch an octave, which I use the expression pedal to change. I have a delay that I use for lots of different things. It's basically just a wash. I'll use it as a tail coming out of solos. And I have the tails staying after I turn the delay off, so I can actually let it go and go and go. I also have a distorted lead, so instead of just my clean lead sound, its own delay on it as well. It's not the same delay. So if I switch to the other bank here, the violin tone on this bank is a lot cleaner and prettier of a preset. Alright, so in just a second, I'm going to take the pod off of the top of this. It's not permanently mounted because this whole rig was designed to be torn down and set back up over and over again. The supports on the sides that this thing sits on used to be made out of steel in the first revision of this board, and they just weighed too much. I needed to find a way to cut down the weight, so I went with aluminum. So I have these fabricated on the sides, and I thought of the idea to add Nutric D-Series jacks. So on both sides there are jacks. Alright, so what's going on underneath the pod? Pretty straightforward. Here's the I/O I was talking about coming in. This is the XLR line running from Beatbox to, this is just a throughput XLR connector, runs over here to a right angle XLR into the mic input. The other side, coming out of the pod, HD500X goes into this 1/4 inch barrel connector, comes out, boom, into the mono input. The aux input coming in over here, another 1/4 inch cable. Powered everything with a Voodoo Lab Pedal Power 2, and I have a radial passive direct box. They sound great, they're bulletproof, they're fantastic. To make this a little bit easier to see without the glare, I'm going to pull the power on my LEDs. I've just cut some aluminum strip here, and I've added LED bars on it. They're wired up, terminated to a DC 2.1 millimeter jack. You can power these with 9 volt DC or 12 volt DC. I have a piece of plexiglass that I cut, and I have risers on it. This allows the wireless units, which are under here, the violin and the guitar respectively. These are Line 6 G30s. Allows them to not get bumped. The settings always stay the same. I don't have to worry about any of that. And it also protects the controls on these units. I've got a rehoused sonic maximizer. This is a BBE sonic stomp. I've rehoused it into this little Hammond enclosure. And then I've got a Mower bass EQ pedal, which is just pushing a little bit of, it's probably like 40, might be 80 hertz, and steps the gain up. That goes to here. So signal comes out of the loop station into the radial DI. I pull signal off of the throughput, goes through this pedal chain out to here. This might not stay in future revisions of this rig. That and the Voodoo Lab are a lot of power when the only thing that I'm powering really need is the RC300 and the 2 Line 6 G30s. Alright, so now that you guys know how I have everything routed, I'm just going to do a quick demo of everything sitting in the mix together. We'll start with the drums. Put some violin in here. Just a little bit louder. Hey, thanks for watching the video. You made it all the way to the end, which I think is a little bit of an achievement in itself these days. If you have questions, hit me in the comments section. I'll make sure to get back to you. You can also hit me up on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. If you're not following me on any of those platforms or subscribe to me on here, please make sure to do so. I'd appreciate it. I know that this rig, compared to the analog setup that I used to run, is not as interesting or complex from the outside. It might be interesting for you, but I know that it doesn't have as much going on, and that's on purpose and by design. I wanted something more simple, something more consistent. This rig does far more and is capable of far more with a way better signal to noise ratio than my analog setup, and this only weighs 52 pounds in its flight case, whereas my old rig weighed well over 120. So this is a massive savings. It's simpler from the standpoint of consistency too. When I show up to a gig and I plug in everything where they need to be plugged in, it's going to sound exactly the same as it did the night before and the following night, because there's no knobs that can get bumped, there's no buttons I have to worry about. Having a digital brain has made things so much more streamlined. If you're a big fan of the Throwback Thursday show, know that it's coming back. I'm working on episodes and you'll see this rig in it. Until then, cheers.